Good morning. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray. Today is Popcast 74, and it's called Nature's Wisdom, Part 24. I realized yesterday that I need to do a review at this point. So much of what is involved in appreciating why we need communal celebrations and how we can pull that off, how we can get everybody to feel comfortable with a communal celebration of soul and sacredness, in spite of the fact that some of us are atheists and some agnostics and uh, some don't personify the sense of the sacred that we feel in us through awe. And of those who do personify it, there's a huge variety of names of God given to it and details for what this deity expects and wants from us. So, how, in the face of that, could we have a communal celebration of soul and sacredness? And I think that we can, but it seems to me that in order to be able to see that, we need to have a review of things that have been said before because they set the table for that appreciation about the reality of communal celebration and the need for it and the real possibility for it. So, okay, I won't call it a quick review. I'll try to cover it entirely today. But in Popcast 22, I also did a review of the first 21 podcasts, and they set a lot of the tone of, my point of view. In Popcasts 49 and 50, I reviewed a little of the material that had been covered since Popcast 22. That review, in all honesty, wasn't as thorough as I wanted or as good as I wanted. But I was determined to take a few days off from my anniversary forward, which timed out the way it did. In this instance, I'll add, by the way, that my own birthday, at which I'll be a proud old 78, which is, I never expected to live to 70, so it's pretty wonderful. But my birthday is August the 10th, and I believe I've counted correctly that I'll have done 100 of these things on that day. And so I'll do 100, and then I'll take another week or so off and consider where to go from here, from there. Okay, so the review. So the first thing is a point of view. And I mentioned it a little bit yesterday. There's a scientific point of view, and then there's a psychological point of view. The scientific point of view is purely objective, and it doesn't rely on anything that can't be objectively demonstrated by the strict methods of science. So that makes it very useful because it becomes uh, uh, able to manipulate the world around us to our great benefit. Um, but it also means it has limitations. And one thing it can't do is give us any comfort about the meaning of life and the energy one needs to live and the direction that one needs to live. Actually, having energy and direction and meaning makes a hell of a big difference in how much you've enjoyed the life you're living. And so science is simply unable to provide those things because those things are not amenable to the scientific method. They require subjectivity. They're not amenable to objectivity, purely objectivity. So it turns out that our psychology is a lovely mix of objective and subjective. It starts with the subjective intuitions that give us awe, and the awe gives us the energy we call hope. Um, that there's meaning and purpose in life, and it's a wonderful thing. We're overwhelmed with gratitude, and that we indeed should live our lives as a way of the most sincere expression of gratitude that's we're capable of. And it also leads us to each other because, of course, now particularly that we're aware of our own death and that we sometimes hate and others hate us, and that we could fail to meet necessity to our great dismay, and that there seems to be unfairness in the world, which of course relates to how easily we can rely on ourselves to meet necessity, among other things. It also relates to people dying early through no fault of their own because they're at an intersection when a tree falls and it falls on their car and kills them, whereas the guy before and after them, the light turned green and he drove away. No harm, no foul. So unfairness is kind of like a significant aspect, this along with death, hate, and necessity. And because of those things, we very much need the comfort and support of each other. We want to know, for one thing, do other people feel the same awe we have inside us? And it doesn't prove that we should take hope from that awe and take the guidance it seems to call us to of living in fruitful relation with others. But it gives us comfort that that we're wise to do that. And that's the whole point. You can't live life with certainty. You can only have wisdom. And wisdom is frail. I think that's probably the, the truest thing I've ever said, and possibly the wisest. We all know wisdom is frail. It's damn frail. And we see it all around us. We see it in the Great Divide. The Great Divide is largely a case of not enough wisdom. We're not paying attention to nature's wisdom and we're not applying it. And it's a common condition of mankind that this exists. In our own country's history, it's existed plenty of times and lasted for long periods of time. And it's actually the common standard of human relations ever since 15, 20,000 years ago when we became so numerous. We stopped living in the small tribes that we evolved to live in and started living in villages and larger congregations of people, and eventually in systems of villages run by some local leader, and then empires. And 15,000 years isn't enough years for our brain to evolve, our psychology to be comfortable with all the stress and strain that's involved in living in such large numbers. So we are dependent on culture, and culture is frail. Its wisdom is frail. And just as our individual wisdom is frail, our cultural wisdom is as frail as we are. So, this condition where people treat each other really badly is a characteristic tradition since, enough years ago that we began to live in large numbers. And the tradition of quickly forming oppositional camps based on just about everything you can think of, forming a divide, is also a very common tradition. It shouldn't alone frighten us. It's almost a natural condition, considering that we haven't evolved psychologically enough, physically enough, to not live that way, so that we are dependent on our frail culture and our own frail selves to find the wisdom to deal with this condition, because it's harmful to us. It's profoundly harmful to us to live in this great divide. And the key aspect that we need to have that we can't have because of the great divide is the communal celebration of the thing that is the source of hope and the source of the call to each other, the awe that gives us a sense of the sacred and a sense of our own soulfulness. we need to have the communal celebration of that because it gives us extra hope, which we need it gives us extra comfort, which we need um, in order to face death, hate, necessity, and unfairness. So the scientific point of view isn't adequate. The psychological point of view, which begins with subjective and objective mixed together, uh, leads us ultimately to a sense, to hope, and to the gift of each other, and to communal celebration of that, which will weaken the divide and have us living more wisely nature's wisdom. Um, so that's sort of the beginning point and the end point of the review. But now let's fill in. So awe, um, when we when we began this series of podcasts, we began. I began with the name of the channel, Change the World. That's my YouTube channel name. And one of these days, I'm going to learn enough about YouTube to be able to tell you how to find that quickly and easily. Uh, the, um, the first point I made was if you want to change the world, you begin by changing yourself. Um, and there is evidence I recited in earlier podcasts that changing yourself actually has a small effect on the culture we live in, on the world we live in. So it's a little tiny bit of changing the world. And that the way you begin to make a change in yourself is to go deep, to go experience the awe deep in yourself, your own soulfulness, and the sense of the sacred that you find deep in yourself. And in so doing, you'll refresh the hope, which is where the energy to live comes from. I mean, hope equals energy to live. I mean, it's kind of like, E equals MC squared. It's a pretty fundamental, statement about life. Um, and you also refresh your sense of being connected to others because this leads us very directly to wonder from others, do you experience this also? Does it seem like it calls you to live, in a fruitful relation to others, as it seems to me to call us to do that? So you want to you want to act on this sense of connection. You look and see the great divide, and you realize what's missing is a middle, and that if we could recreate the middle, we'd actually be making a practical impact on the great divide. So, how do you recreate the middle? I suggested that one of the things you can do is to make a respectful step towards the other. View the camps, if you will, as if there were two individuals in opposite corners of the room, and the space to the middle seemed pretty damn far away, like maybe more of a journey than I really want to make, especially for that guy. What a scumbucket he is or she is. Um, the the point is, psychologically, something wonderful happens if you make a step towards the other, a respectful step. Okay, we're different, but let's try and figure out if we can, work together somehow. If we can find something, we can agree on something we experience together that we like, and if the other makes a step towards you, then this miracle of the expanding middle occurs. And suddenly the middle of the room expands to include you both where you stand, only one step in from the corner. And so it seems to me here's a system that would actually work. Change the world, change yourself, experience awe, refresh your hope in the sense of connection, recreate the middle, step towards the other, the middle expands. But it still leaves this very, very difficult task of living together. Just because we have a better understanding of each other and of how we might approach each other and reduce the middle doesn't mean that it's easy. Nothing about life is easy. Not being born, not dying, and very little in between. It might be easier to hate than it is to live uh, by swallowing your pride, exercising restraint, giving up your intellectual arrogance, giving up your type bias about openness, and being more humble, appreciating that we could be wrong. Our intuition's the problem with subjective bases for wisdom is it could be wrong, and et cetera, and et cetera. They're still very, very hard things to do. And, but at least this gives us a way to approach the moment we're in with some deeper appreciation of how reasonable it is that people would have a great divide, and that there is a way that we can chip away at the great divide. We can bridge it, I guess is a better phrase. We can reduce the great divide by following these, this point of view and this sequence of steps that begins with experiencing awe and being refreshed, and ends with a communal celebration of awe of the sacred and of our own soulfulness. And in between, we've succeeded in making it more possible that we can live with less of this great divide, but it's still hard. So the thing about awe is it calls us to live with gratitude. It calls us to live in fruitful relation to each other, but it's a call. It's not a command. So we're perfectly able to turn away from it. And if we couldn't turn away from it, then there'd be no moral quality to our lives, no real meaning to our lives. We'd be like Stepford wives. We'd be robots. We'd be programmed to be nice to each other and to, turn towards each other and be supportive and helpful. It's just that we wouldn't have any moral choice in the matter. Only because we can actually turn away from the awe, turn away from its call to live, in fruitful relation with others, does it actually constitute a moral quality of for our lives if we decide to feel the awe, to try to live the awe, and to try to live in fruitful relation with others. And so that means if it's to be a real choice, it has real meaning, then there have to be a fair number of people who choose other. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a real choice. If everybody makes the same choice, we'd be programmed. It has to be possible, if there's to be a moral quality for our lives, for people to actually turn away. So then, I am not going to get into a lot of philosophical, dogmatic arguments about what does this mean about God. And I'm not going to for a good reason, because I don't think we know beans about God enough to answer that question. If we are honest, the God we experience, whether it's only in our psychology or an external reality, is unknowable. And every religion in the world says that, but most people who practice religion forget that. And it can be especially tempting, in a case where, for example, modern Christianity is stressing Jesus and gives very little attention to the Father or the Holy Spirit, other than in the sign of the cross and in a certain prayer. Mostly, it's all about Jesus, and for the reason that Jesus is understandable, knowable, but only, if I may say this, as a man, as a human. Jesus as God, if Jesus is God, is largely unknowable for the good reason that God's largely unknowable. If the God in our psychology is unknowable, the one behind our psychology, if there is one, is also unknowable. And it can't be any other way. There's no conceivable way that we could have a detailed understanding of an entity powerful enough to create the universe, time, space, evolution, and us. There's just a difference in quality that it's insurmountable. It'd be like expecting an ant to build a rocket ship. Uh, it's just ridiculous. It's arrogance of the highest form. And the contentions to the contrary really are harmful. They're not just, oh, there's a difference of opinion here. They're really harmful. You need to accept, okay, so okay, time to back down. This is not the way I want to be talking. I shouldn't be saying these things to this extreme. Wisdom would advise me not to do this, and I have, for a moment here, lost my wisdom. So let's pull this back. We're going to go our go back machine to 3 or 4 minutes ago. I'm going to say that the great majority of religions accept that God is unknowable. And so it's for that reason that arguments or debates about what does it mean to God to know that some people have to turn away from awe and turn away from the gift of each other. Does that mean those people are predestined? Does that mean that God's made the world in such a way that some people have to fail to, in this important aspect of life, refuse their own gifts? Et cetera, et cetera. My simple answer to why I don't want to get into debates about those things is an honest one. I don't feel that I could possibly know enough about God, much less the mind of God, to have a conversation like that. And I honestly don't think anybody else can either. Well, there's obviously people who spent innumerable, lifetimes gone by arguing about those things. And there are lots of people today who, while they give lip service to the idea that God's unknowable, they actually seem to act like, God's a drinking buddy, and they know him pretty well. And, so I leave that there. And I apologize greatly for not being very wise in the way I was speaking. It is a good example, though. A good person who spent a lot of time thinking, reading, and writing and talking about nature's wisdom can easily say things that are just plain not wise. And certainly I've had that experience lots in my life. But I will say this was a little bit traumatic, even by my standards, to go that deep off, off the path of wisdom and get that carried away. So again, my apologies. Let's move on. The One of the things we discover in this, I've continued this review just a few more minutes. One of the things we discover is that in addition to the call that we feel in our deep inside ourselves, the call, the all calls us to each other. In addition to that, there's things about how we've evolved that build on and support uh, this call, and that tend to lead us to live in relation to each other. One of the things is, that it's so frightening that some scarcely 5 or 7 thousand years ago, we developed enough psychological skill to be able to become aware of our own death and aware of hate and aware of necessity and aware of unfairness and to be threatened by them. and they made us turn more towards each other. Another thing is pretty well known. There's something about our work habits and our work skills that makes us thrive more often when we work together than when we work alone. So, um, Adam Smith, a couple hundred years ago now, said that there's something, the equivalent of, uh, what was his phrase? My goodness, it's embarrassing, but I can't remember Adam Smith's phrase about the hand. Um, that, wow, boy, when you get senioritis, it smacks you right in the face, right in the middle of a sentence. And the invisible hand, Adam Smith said. It's as if there's an invisible hand that leads us to pursue our own interests in economic matters, and in the process to create a stronger economy than would exist if we had not each pursued our own interests. Um, that needs to be taken with a good deal of caution. We've learned a lot more about our economy since then. Um, but it is the case, and he has correctly alerted us to us, that working together results in our meeting necessity more often than we would if we worked apart. What he described, when you actually read the book, which is kind of tedious because it's endless detail with very little generalization, what he describes is essentially by organizing people to work together and build machines, you can make 1,000 objects where working by yourself you could only make one. And he also describes that some people are more skillful at doing certain kinds of work than other kinds of work. And so it makes more sense for you to make shoes and the other guy to put horseshoes on your horse, because you become better at making shoes when you just make shoes, and he becomes better at putting horseshoes on when he just does horseshoes. So the division of labor is a natural thing, and a thing that's good for us, that builds the economy, because we are more efficient when we work together in this way. So, so we knew about that for quite some while, but what we hadn't noticed is connected to Myers-Briggs and the whole field of psychological type that Jung invented about a century ago. And what is there is, as I read it, is that our evolved psychology includes a variety of things that are very useful in dealing with gaining information about the world around us and making decisions about what we're going to do next. And typically, we're not all equally skilled in all of the various psychological skills that are useful for perceiving and judging. We're typically more skilled at one and less skilled at others. Just as we see in a child develops introversion or extroversion more one way or the other, or a child develops, in this way instead of that way. So because of that, there's the skills, for example, are things like a wonderful command for facts. This guy has just got a nose for facts. He can go out, look at the situation, and come home with a pretty good command of the facts involved. And then there's somebody else who's not so good for the facts, but he's pretty good at stringing theories together about how the facts might go together and to create a pattern. And patterns are useful for seeing things about the world that we can use to our benefit. And then there's another guy who's pretty decisive. And there's another guy who always wants to keep trying to get more information before he makes a decision. They often aren't that fond of each other, startlingly. But collectively, this group of people ends up doing better. So the fact of our psychological differences tends to reinforce this call to live in a fruitful relation to each other and reinforce it quite strongly in a way that we hadn't noticed. And that by noticing, we can see some of the strengths that make this communal celebration not only necessary, but possible. And so that's enough of a review. Uh, Tomorrow we'll start dealing with where do we go from here. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye bye.